right. So 2020 Fatality Summary Report. We're going to break this up into a few areas. First, we're going to cover the trends over the last 6 decades. We're going to also break down the fatalities by license. This next section, group discussion about improving safety locally. What I want you guys to do as SNTAs is start a discussion about how the safety was last year at your drop zone and come up with 4 points, what they think was important on safety and what they need to concentrate on next. And then you can compare it to what we come up with from the fatalities from last year. We're going to cover the individual fatalities one at a time and by category. We're going to do an overview of incident reporting. You've noticed USPA has really been pushing incident reporting the last couple of years. Lessons learned from the fatality, that's where we're going to compare your improvement points to what we learned from fatal and non-fatal incidents. And then Fatality Index over the last 6 years. The fatalities over the last 60 years. In the 60s, we were really low, but we were also doing really low jump numbers. By the 70s, things had really picked up. Jump numbers really started to pick up. That was when we had our highest fatalities in the 70s, early 80s. And then we've had a slow decline. And if you look at this graph, it's kind of busy. It's kind of hard to tell. So the way we do that is we break it into 10-year increments. So there you can see that general decline. In the 60s, what that is 26 fatalities a year. In the 70s, it's 42 fatalities. And then if you go all the way down to 2010s, the average over the 10 years was 20 fatalities, or 20.7 fatalities each year. The fatalities for 2020, we had 2 student fatalities. One of them was a Tandem, 1 A license, 2 B license, 1 C license, and 5 D license. It's normal for a majority of our fatalities to be D licensed, and mostly because that's what we have the greatest number of. They're also the ones typically making the most jumps, being the instructors and stuff like that. If you compare it over the last 10-year decade, down a little bit on students, pretty average on A license, pretty average on B license, down just a little bit on C, but way down on the D license. So right here's where I want you to stop. All right, so 11 fatalities. 1 was a low turn, 3 unintentional low turns. That's the largest category. Incorrect emergency procedures was 2. 1 was a landing problem, low cutaway reserve deployment, 2 medical problems. Okay, so this jumper right here opened up under a canopy and supposedly flew all the way to his holding area on rear risers. What happened is this guy did a high performance turn. It was reported as a little low, but he was planing out. But as soon as he went to his toggles, suddenly there was a hard turn. And when they did an inspection of the gear afterwards, one of his toggles was locked. Excuse me, I'm not sure how somebody could pack a locked toggle where the steering line's locked and get all the way to final. Had he done a canopy control check, this wouldn't have happened. The last time we had someone die because they didn't do a canopy control check was 2018. And it was the same situation. The guy flew all the way back to his holding area on rear risers, and then he cleared his toggles, went into a spin, and he actually died trying to take off his gloves so that he could clear the steering toggle and spun all the way into the ground. So this is something that happens every couple years. Okay, high performance turn. This guy had 4,500 jumps, 17 years in the sport. I've been flying a 99 square foot canopy for a long time, was very good at the high performance landings, but he was very uncurrent. And we think that looking at the ground from altitude, he had lost that perception of knowing exactly where he's at because he wasn't current. Guys that are uncurrent, it's not about a jump number, it's about skill. And we can't regulate skill. So we regulate jump numbers, say you got to do a jump number. But if you're a swooper, you want to start slow by doing 90-degree turns, maybe 270s, working up to those 450s that you used to do. Don't let your jumpers go out there and say, oh, I've been doing this forever. Just because I took 3 months off doesn't make a difference. It does make a difference. And it could be free flying. If you're used to doing 8-ways, start with a 2-way and work your way back up to that skill level that you enjoyed before you took that break. Currency was a huge issue this year. This fatality here, 2 things kind of stuck out in me. One, this guy was a pilot, and it's very possible that when he was flying his landing pattern, he was flying his landing pattern to something he was visually used to, which is a lot more wide and a lot more broad than we can do under parachutes. So it's very possible that he was going for a visual on his landing pattern that he was used to when he was flying. The other thing was the instructor hadn't been doing a lot of student jumps. So her skills as far as being able to tell where the student was at, she might not have known that he was going to land so close. So we can't regulate skills. And if you know what skills that you use for every jump, you have to break into those slowly, guys. Low reserve deployment. This was a guy that was practicing for a demo jump. He was going to do a demo the next day. He exited the airplane. He spun 3 times, 3 revolutions under his main canopy. It was a 107, and then cut away. And then he went back into free fall for 14 seconds before he deployed his reserve. Now, we'll never know exactly why he spent that 14 seconds. I imagine he was looking for his reserve handle for 14 seconds before he actually got it deployed. It's possible that he tried to get stable first before he went to that reserve handle. No reason for this fatality. Had he had an RSL or an AAD, he'd be alive today. This fatality was actually a tandem. What we learned was that there was an entanglement with the handy cam on the tandem after he went into a spin. When his hand got caught into one of the steering lines, the tandem instructors need to start thinking about at what altitude would I cut away my handy cam. I know you don't want to cut away equipment, but you don't want to go in either. Camera guys, if they have an entanglement, they know that they got to cut away their helmet and lose that equipment, or at least run the chance of losing that equipment. After this fatality, we went back and looked at fatality videos from the past, and we found at least one other where there's a handy cam entanglement that we hadn't caught before. And tandem instructors need to know that they have to have an altitude that they're going to cut away that equipment if something becomes entangled. This guy ended up getting fixated on getting that entanglement, and was about 700 feet before he finally got everything clear, and then decided to do something. And he ended up activating his reserve using his RSL rather than pulling his reserve handle. And I don't know if he was traumatized with the handy cam and didn't want to risk getting entangled again or something, but he activated his reserve through his RSL, which cut away the left side. And he ended up hitting the ground spinning under half of a main canopy. The reserve never fully deployed. Medical problems are both physical problems and mental illness problems. We had one of each. The physical illness, this was a guy that hadn't jumped in about 18 years. He had done a full FJC. He did great on the jump, opened up under canopy, flew to his holding area, and then at 1,500 feet suddenly became unresponsive. His canopy slowly turned downwind. They lost visual of him, and he landed on the other side of the hill. When they got to him, they administered CPR until emergency services got there. But he never recovered. Everything indicated that that was probably a heart attack. The mental illness, the guy came out, he cleared all of his stuff out of his locker, put everything neatly in his car, did a recurrency jump with the coach. Everything went perfectly. The coach saw him under a perfectly good canopy, flying towards the holding area. That was the last time he was seen until he was found without his harness in a parking lot. He undid his chest strap and left the harness, went back into free fall. Unintentional low turns, guys. This is the largest category, and all of these were poor responses to a low altitude emergency. First fatality in this one, there was actually 2 airplanes in the air. They ended up dropping their jumpers at the same time, so both groups ended up coming into the landing area at the same time. And this particular jumper was about 300 feet or lower as he was going downwind, and the rest of the jumpers were coming towards him. And he didn't see them because they were on the same altitude as him, so they were right on the horizon. And the one particular camera that he turned to miss was very light colored, and even on the video, it was really hard to see until he started to turn, and it looked like he was going to turn 90 degrees to land crosswind into the landing area. And right at that point, as he started to turn, he noticed that area of the canopy, and then he whipped a really hard 180, and he didn't finish the turn before he hit the ground. If he would have been a little bit more aware of the other canopies, there's a lot of ways that one could have been avoided. Situational awareness, guys. You got to stay aware. And the closer we get to the ground, the closer we get to everybody else. Just when you have the most canopies in close proximity around you. So the closer you get to the ground, the more you have to be aware of your surroundings. The next one was a guy that's coming into a landing area, and he was distracted looking at the landing area over his left shoulder. When he turned back on the line of flight, he was a lot closer to a tree line than he thought he was going to be. This particular jumper actually hit that tree line the year before. So when he saw that tree line so close, he whipped a 180 way too close to the ground, and ended up hitting the ground at a high rate of speed. Let's see, this last one was, this guy was coming back from a long spot. He had plenty of open area in front of him. He chose a 180 degree turn to try and get back into the wind. Once again, he could have done a 90-degree turn, been safe. He could have done a downwind landing. The winds were 6 miles an hour on the ground. He could have done a downwind landing and been safe. These are mistakes that people are making over and over again, and they don't always end up with fatalities. I get a lot of incident reports that talk about the same things where people are making bad decisions low to the ground. One of the things I've been harping on is guys, when you have your instructors do emergency procedures, at least 3 of them, work them all the way down to the ground and give them some scenarios to work through. You're headed towards a tree line. You thought you were going to land in front of it. Now you realize you're going to hit it. What are you going to do? Make them physically go into half brakes. That's what they're supposed to do if they're going to hit a tree anyway. Now they've slowed down. Maybe they can look right or left and do a slow, flat turn, keep their hands at half brakes and finish their flare when they get to the ground. You can tell them that all day long, but if they don't practice it when they get into that situation, a knee-jerk reaction of going straight to, I got to do a hard toggle turn to miss the tree. So landing fatalities are 45% of all of our fatalities. All of these were responses to low altitude emergencies, seeing a canopy and doing a hard turn, seeing a tree line, doing a hard turn, wanting to turn into the wind and doing a hard turn. Guys, that's unacceptable. Go into half brakes and then decide what you're going to do. Slow yourself down first. Don't whip into a turn. All right, so we're going to talk about incident reports. Incident reports have gained a lot. In 2018, we had 29 incident reports. One of the things I kept telling the board is if we can get incident reporting up, then we can start seeing trends early and maybe we can prevent them before it gets to the point where it becomes a fatality. So in 2020, we had 125 incident reports turned in, which isn't fantastic. We could do a lot better, but it's headed in the right direction. And I appreciate the effort. Some of you guys out there are trying to get people to send in reports. Here, we're going to compare 2020 to 2019. We had a few more incident reports in 2019, but we weren't shut down for a month and a half. If you look at this, we'll see 2 major differences. April's easy to explain because most drop zones were shut down in April because of COVID. June, I actually had to go back in June and figure out why June was so high. But 2019, that was when I first started this push for incident reports, and a bunch of articles came out about incident reports in June. So I believe because of all the articles that were put out in April, May, and June, up to rather high just for that month. We have the 2 months in August and September, and I think that was because of our response to the incident reports that we got when they first came out of COVID. We were already talking that currency was going to be an issue, but we were surprised by how many reports suddenly started coming in May and June, and most of them were actually listed that currency was probably one of the contributing factors to the incident report. Thanks to Jen Sharp and Shannon Searles, who's director of sport promotion, we started doing a lot of social media campaigns, and I think it actually made a difference, and I think that's why we're a little bit lower in August and September. What's really interesting is if you stack the fatalities on top of the incident reports, you see as we come out, as incident reports are climbing, that's when we're most vulnerable to having our fatalities. On the other hand, when our incident reports are on the decline, that's when we had the least amount of fatalities, or actually no fatalities this year. So that's going to be interesting to see over the next couple of years how that trend pans out and if that continues. But you remember when I first started back in 2019, when I started saying we needed incident reports, I told the board, if we get incident reports, we can see these trends early and we can make a difference. And now we can see that. It's going to be interesting over the next couple of years when we have years of incident reports to kind of compare to see if that trend holds true. All right, so 4 major key points. So incident reports help us see the trends happen early, because 11 fatalities, it's really hard to see a trend. But when you have 125 incident reports, you can start to see what we need to focus on in the field a lot faster than on 11 fatalities. Low altitude plan B, guys, we need to run at least 3 of those scenarios all the way to the ground. And you guys can go over the incident reports that are coming out in the magazines and just pick a scenario and say, okay, so you try to kick out of your line twist, you got to your hard deck, you decide you had to cut away, okay, now you're low under your reserve, you're not going to make it back to the drop zone, you got to find an outfield, you get to your outfield, oh, you're overshooting, you're going to hit the tree line at the far end, and run it all the way to the ground. Make sure they practice all of that and get that drilled into their head and start building a little bit of muscle memory so their knee-jerk reaction aren't these low turns. And then realistic and frequent practice of EPs and those low altitude stuff. And then currency, and this is this is something as the SNTAs, this is what you guys have to focus on, because we can't regulate skill. I can't regulate an instructor's ability to radio a student down. I can't regulate a swooper's ability to swoop. All I can do is make a currency requirement on jump numbers, but you guys know the jumpers, you know the skills that they're using, make them at high risk of having an accident. Make sure you talk to your jumpers and spread the word, talk to your instructors and get them to do the work. Fatality indexes, and the easiest way to think about this is just how many fatalities did we have per 100,000 skydives? In the 60s, we were averaging 6 fatalities per 100,000 skydives. In the 70s, we got that down to 3.8. Our fatality numbers actually went up, but our jump numbers doubled. The fatalities per 100,000 actually went down. In the 80s, we got it down to 1.9. In the 90s, we're up to 28 million skydives, just over 1 per 100,000 skydives. 2000 to 2010, we're a little bit closer to 1, just barely over 1. And then 2010 to 2020, 1 in 154,000 skydives. And if we look at 2020 being, oh, we should have had less fatalities, we had less jumps. And it's true, we did have less jumps. We had 15% less jumps than we did the year before. But our fatality count was so low that we still dropped 0.39, or 1 fatality in 250,000 skydives. So even with the not jumping in April and half the drop zone still being closed in part of May and our jump numbers being down, we're still lowering that fatality index every year. And that's pretty much the 2020 fatality summary.